Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening. On December 8th, 2021, I published an article on Tor.com called Beyond Dune and Foundation, Golden Age and New Wave Classics that should be turned into movies right now. It has 72 comments, and if I'm being honest, it's the thing that I've written that's probably been read more widely than anything else I've ever written. More so than my award-nominated Sci-fi novel, Ring of Fire, or my Clash book science fiction novel, Goddamn Killing Machines. But you know what? They're out there. You can get them. Anyways, a year has passed, and I wanted to make a podcast and a video that for on the subject, since I know some people just won't sit down and read a whole article. So anyways, here it is. We are going to focus on so-called golden age of science fiction. This is the era from the late 30s to the mid 60s, and some of these works were written outside of that time frame, but there are authors that are known for being golden age authors. So there's no Philip K. Dick, there's no John Brunner or Norman Spinrad, who I consider them to be new wave writers. And although some of their works did appear during this era, during the golden age, especially the really awesome early Philip K. Dick and John Brunner stuff, I'll talk about them in another video. But anyways, before we start, a little bit about me. I'm David Agranoff. I'm a science fiction and horror author who loves and studies the history of genre for my blog and my two podcasts. That's this one and the Dickheads podcast, which is devoted to the study of Philip K. Dick. So I have a blog that has the same title, Postcards from a Dying World, and I have over 1,000, well, probably 1,500 book reviews up there. I've been doing it for about 12 years, reviewing everything that I read. So, anyways, but there are classic works of science fiction that I think in the right hands could make excellent films. And this is what we're going to be talking about. Now, I'm a screenwriter myself, so of course, I would love to adapt any or all of these works into films. So Hollywood, if you're out there, hit me up. But anyways, this is 10 golden age science fiction works that I think should be films now. Starting with number 10, The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut. And let me show you what that cover looks like. That's the original cover. And then there's a Sci-fi Masterworks edition that I can show you as well. Maybe not. Anyways, Sirens of Titan. It's Kurt Vonnegut. So the pitch, this early Kurt Vonnegut is pure science fiction. Part time spanning, tongue in cheek, like Douglas Adams style or Robert Sheckley type science fiction. I'm due to reread it myself. I read it a long time ago. The plot is almost too confusing to get into here, but it involves time travel, interplanetary war, and kind of everything you need. And science fiction is overdue for a very funny, weird masterpiece. We could always use some more attention on Kurt Vonnegut. There's a really excellent documentary on Hulu, by the way. Kurt Vonnegut, Unstuck in Time. That's, let's build off that. Sirens of Titan. It could be an art house movie, but the effects don't even have to be very expensive or look great, because kind of a retro, kind of loose, like cheesy sci-fi look would actually work for this piece. Jerry Garcia used to own the rights, and maybe John Mayer would want to buy it and produce it. I don't know. I'm just kind of kidding. He's just doing whatever Jerry Garcia used to do, right? So let's give it to a comedy director and see what happens next. Number 9, The Earth Abides by George Stewart. Now, this one is from 1960 or 59. I don't know. I could be wrong on the year. But The Earth Abides by George Stewart. This is an eco-apocalypse novel. It's very popular about surviving a plague. It's an apocalypse road novel that's very heavy on ideas, and cast with the right actor, it could be done with a relatively low budget. The novel is about nature reclaiming the earth and how small we are, and it's very popular. And I think with, like I said, with the right actor, you could really do amazing things with The Earth Abides. Number 8, The Stars My Destination by Alfred Bester. Now, this one, in my original article on Tor.com, I pitched The Demolished Man as a film by boss level director Joe Carnahan. And I got savaged in the comments for choosing The Demolished Man over The Stars My Destination. Now, look, they both make excellent films, but I hadn't read The Stars My Destination yet. But I fixed that. And since I wrote that article, I read The Stars My Destination, and everybody's right. It should be The Stars My Destination. It should be a movie first. If we're only going to make one Bester, his second sci-fi classic is the one that we're going to want to make. And I agree. That's the one to do it. Now, we did a whole Dickheads episode with D. Harlan Wilson, who just wrote a book on The Stars My Destination, a companion to it. So you can go listen to that whole episode on Dickheads on the Dickheads podcast feed. And look, D. Harlan Wilson and I are both writers, so we'd be excellent people to adapt it. Now, it almost was a movie, very close, with Paul S. Anderson, the guy who did Event Horizon. Right after he did Event Horizon and Soldier, the movie he tried to get made next was The Stars My Destination. It didn't end up happening, and he made a bazillion Resident Evil movies. But I would love to see like the visual insanity of like a Guillermo del Toro with this great property. It was also a Sci-Fi Masterworks edition. That's the one I read. I think it's great. Hire Professor Wilson and I to adapt this one. We'll kick butt on it. I really do believe so. All right. So number 7, The Dying Earth by Jack Vance. This is basically a series of stories collected into a fix-up novel called the most recent edition is the Tales from the Dying Earth. But here's my pitch. In the original article, I did talk about the Dying Earth, and this is a fantasy series, but it's one that features battles between warriors with winged creatures, dragons, wizards, swordplay in a far future. It takes place in the far future, so it's still science fiction. And it's one that the new wave authors all grew up reading. And there's a reason why many of the old school fans point to this 1950s series when they saw the flying creatures in James Cameron's Avatar, because I think a lot of us were all thinking about the Dying Earth books at that point. And they have the epic scope of like a Tolkien or like a George R.R. Martin, but without like the bloat. Like, these are very thin stories, and they're very well told, and they're very fat. They're very quick, and they're just excellently written. It's been a long time since I read them, but they're really good. Somebody like Peacock, who wants or needs to get their own kind of like Lord of the Rings type franchise, but not as expensive, could get a highly literate showrunner, somebody like Brandon Braga, who actually reads books, and put a couple of novelists that grew up on Vance in the writer's room with more experienced TV writers. Well, John Shirley has a lot of experience writing TV, and he grew up on these books and has recently written a series that's very Dying Earth influence. So I would put John Shirley and Laird Barron in the room to help adapt these, and it gives you your own Game of the Rings of a Time of Dragon type show for somebody like Peacock or Hulu or Apple TV, somebody like that. And I know they've all like tried, but here's one with existing IP. Number 6, Eric John Stark, Outlaw of Mars by Lee Brackett. You might be familiar with that name, but we'll get to that in a second. So here's the pitch. The Expanse and Firefly meet Flash Gordon from The Woman Who Wrote The Empire Strikes Back. That's how you pitch it. Eric John Stark was born on Mercury in a time when dinosaurs roamed the Earth. The solar system is populated by warring factions of spacefaring Martians. Brackett's high adventure novels were often called planetary romances, but they're pure, sugary, sweet soap operas, or not soap operas, excuse me, space operas. And The Secret, Sinharat could appeal to sci-fi fans looking for something that is Western-ish, like Firefly, with healthy doses of sword-wielding dinosaurs, or sword-wielding action. That the dinosaurs don't carry swords, but dinosaurs, spaceships, swordplay. Come on, dude, sign me up. So, and seriously, George Lucas hired this woman to write Empire Strikes Back for a reason. I mean, her stuff's awesome. So I would do a TV series format. Lee Brackett intended for the hero to be black, despite what the cover artist did, making him white. I would fix that, and I would hire African American space opera author Maurice Broaddus. One of my favorite reads of the year is Sweep of Stars by Maurice. Great stuff. He could turn it into pure pulp joy. And speaking of trailblazing women who wrote science fiction in the golden age, how about one of Lee Brackett's best friends for the next one? Number 5 is Jarrell of Jory by C.L. Moore. Now, we just did an episode of the 1930s podcast series, our science fiction series, with Cora Bullard and Greg Cox on C.L. Moore. So if you want more information on that, I highly recommend you go back and listen to that episode or watch the video. Anyways, the pitch. Jarrell of Jory is the female Conan, blazing a trail through rich fantasy world that was created in the 30s and 40s by a woman who was herself a pioneer in the science fiction field. Catherine Lucille Moore is the author of Jarrell of Jory. So it was a woman actually writing these stories, these like classic sword play stories. These stories first appeared in the pages of Weird Tales, where Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft have been cutting their professional teeth for several years. But 2 decades before Tolkien would change the fantasy world forever with The Lord of the Rings, C.L. Moore was doing it here in Jarrell of Jory. In the wake of the record amount that the Amazon Studios spent on the Rings of Power, and I actually like the Rings of Power. I think it's pretty good. I'm not a huge fan, but it's great. But anyways, if you wanted something like that, why not adapt a female-centric sword hero in Jarrell of Jory by C.L. Moore? I mean, it's right there. This it's better than Red Sonja because it was actually written by a woman and it has like a woman's touch to many of the things. And if you put a woman like behind the camera and adapting and all that, then you'd really be honoring C.L. Moore, who also wrote television and did all that. Anyways, this is the one on this list that I wouldn't step forward to want to write myself because I think a woman should do it. This character deserves a 10-pole movie. And since just look at the character, right? So who the first choice is to play this role is Jessica Chastain. Now, I said I didn't want to write it, but I would executive produce it. I would help put together the team. So Jessica Chastain, if you're out there, let's get together for brunch at Real Food Daily and talk it over. I'm sure there's a deal we could be made or that could be made. And I think a good person to direct this would be the Woman King and Old Guard director, Gina Bryce, or Prince Brightwood. She's shown the ability to balance the action and character and all that. And if you've ever read these stories, you know that it's right there. Like all the character work is really awesome. So yeah, Jarrell of Jory, number 5. Okay, so number 4, I'm going to cheat a little bit because I'm going to do a tie for 2 works by one author. Mostly, I'm going to talk about number 4, Cemetery World by Clifford D. Simak. So the pitch is a dark and haunting science fiction novel that could be obviously a film um, that could be done on a relatively inexpensive budget, but filled with very grand ideas. Now, Cemetery World takes place 10,000 years after the ancestral home of the human species has been left lifeless. That's right, Earth is lifeless. And it has become the final resting place for the uh, the human diasporas. Basically, like the rich and elite get to be buried on Earth. That's kind of like the concept of Cemetery World. It's been a long time since I read it, but that's my memory of it. And all that might change when a group of colonists want to take back humanity's home. This novel was written by Clifford D. Simek, who got fan letters from a young teenage Isaac Asimov. That's how long he's been doing it. And before the Batman was like a huge success, Matt Reeves, the director, was talking about adapting the Clifford's Max Hugo award-winning novel Way Station for a movie for Netflix. That didn't end up happening. That happens a lot in Hollywood. But the thing about Way Station is I did 2 podcasts on that. One for the Dickheads podcast, and then I was on with Seth Heasley at Hugo's there. Shout out to Seth. So there's 2 podcasts that you can listen to about Way Station, which there's a show on Amazon called Night Sky that looks a lot like Way Station, but that's neither here nor there. Anyways, this is the one that I think would make the best, most like kind of commercially viable movie. But if you ask me, like if you had like a bazillion dollars and you said, David, you can make any Clifford Simak novel into a movie, I'm going to take his classic City, which I think is one of the greatest science fiction novels ever written. And I turned that into a Wolf Walkers style animation movie. Like, man, I would love to see that. But it's a really far-fetched story about, basically robots and dogs sitting around a campfire talking about the mythological long lost human race. It's a weird one, but my God, it's brilliant and it's genius. And so even if like a movie of that seems far-fetched, would never happen, you can go out and read City. It's written over the 40s and 50s, and it is one of the uh, uh, most poignant science fiction novels I ever read. So I highly recommend City. And I would love to see a movie of it. I'm not sure that that's as guaranteed of a hit as Cemetery World. But see, Cemetery World, what I would do is for like a streamer, like a kind of mid-budget and I would hire Brad Anderson, who directed The Machinist and Session 9. And I know he hasn't done science fiction, but I think he would be awesome at that. I love Trans-Siberian. Like he's just one of my favorite directors. I think he's very underrated. Vanishing on 7th Street. He's great. I love Brad Anderson. So Brad, give me a call. Let's do this. Let's do Cemetery World. So for number 3, Babel 17 or Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany. This is a space opera version of Arrival. Is like the first like real like simple pitch for this one. And the thing about Babel 17 is that it takes place in the middle of an interstellar war, so it has a lot of really good kind of space opera elements, but it's like way smarter than you would think from just calling it a space opera. It's like one of the best. So Rida Wong is a linguist and telepath and starship captain who's sent on a really important mission to locate a spy. And the enemy has developed a new weapon, and it is a weapon that spreads through language. And it spreads like a virus, and it changes your perceptions and motivations. This is a really, really cleverly weird sci-fi action thing. And so if you say like a action adventure version of Arrival, I think that is a killer pitch that should immediately like get people's attention. But the story has real special meaning in this era where social media and the entire political movements run on misinformation. So it's funny because it was written in like the late 50s, early 60s, but Babel 17 has even more meaning in like this era where the internet spreads disinformation like really, really quick. So it's more poignant than ever. Okay, this is a short novel that could be a great movie in the right hands, but it would be a very delicate adaptation. And personally, the person I would hire for the job is Duncan Jones, who is the director of Moon and the very underrated Mute. I'm like one of the big fans of Mute, his Netflix movie from a couple of years ago. And I think Duncan Jones could just really do an amazing Babel 17. And yeah, here, check out. I forgot to show you some of the other covers. This is the original cover. It's really cool. Think Galactic or Your World is Lost. And that's kind of I think that's like a 70s cover for it. Anyways, I'm a big fan of this novel. It's been a long time since I read it, but I think it would make a killer movie in the right hands. And written by a Black gay author, one of the first like out science fiction authors in the community. So that's something for representation and diversity. Anyways, so yeah, Babel 17. So number two, now we're really getting into the ones that I really, really would love to see. And even though it's number two, I think number one might make more sense, but number two is the one that I probably like would really want to do. And that is, of course, so yeah, number two is A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. And this is a beloved post-apocalyptic tale that takes place over a dozen centuries and does so while delivering a powerful message about the nature of humanity and civilization. Yeah, it's very powerful stuff. And it's broken up into three acts that take place hundreds of years apart. And while it's been universally praised and it's been in print since 1960 when it came out, like it's seriously always been in print, that is a feat. Okay, that makes it really recognizable IP that is beloved by lots of people. I mean, it's taught in schools. It's very important, a very important book. But because it's set over hundreds of years and is has three really separate parts, a lot of people have considered Canticle for Leibowitz to be unfilmable. Nonsense, I say, because I think what you could do is make it into three separate, like 30 to 40-minute films covering each of the parts. And I think that's possible. And what you would really want to do is do each story kind of in its own style. I think you need to be creative here. And this should be like an art house movie, like a 2001 or an Interstellar type is what you're looking for. And since the parts are so wildly different, get three different filmmakers. Like, imagine if part one was directed by Guillermo del Toro and part two by, let's say, Catherine Bigelow. And I'm just throwing out names here, like I did in the tour article. And maybe part three is like a Christopher Nolan, but it doesn't have to be like those big name filmmakers. It can be young, hungry filmmakers. Any of the three that, any of the filmmakers that I mentioned before, any combination you could do, and you could make a Canticle for Leibowitz. And like I say, this is a very popular book, but it's a very important book. It has, very deep meaning. And so, and Canticle for Leibowitz, like when I say it's been, it's a sci-fi masterwork, and and this is how long it's been around and it's been doing its thing. And like here it says, in the tradition of Brave New World in 1984, that's the type of um uh elevated science fiction we're talking about. Now, we did do an episode of the Dickheads podcast with librarian Sir Brewdog, Ian Duncanson, and Brian Evanson, who is the award-winning, amazing author and recently the show editor of Friend of the Family on Peacock. So hey, look, Brian Evanson's out there. He's a guy you could hire to do it. But like I said, I'm ready to do this. So yeah. So come on, Hollywood, give me a call. Let's make a Canticle for Leibowitz. Let's make the movie that everyone said could not be made, because I believe it can be done. Okay, you ready? Number one, the one that I think would make the most no-brainer adaptation on here, and it's not necessarily my favorite. Like for example, number two, Canticle for Leibowitz, number three, Babel 17, I think might make better movies, but I think this is the no-brainer one. And that is number one, Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov, aka the Robot Mysteries, because I'm not just thinking about this one book. It's the first of a series of novels that there's four eventually. Anyways, let's get into the pitch. The expanded Asimov universe on Apple TV. This one is obvious, and it seems that David Goyer and Josh Friedman over at Foundation were already thinking along these lines, as they hint to these books exist because they exist in the same Foundation universe. Foundation is multiple storylines that takes place very far in the future, and these books, the Robot series, take place in a closer timeline, but in the same universe, but closer to us. But here's the reason why I think it's a no-brainer. Like, I personally really liked the Foundation series and thought it was great, but it's a little esoteric and a little weird, and like it's kind of a stretch to get the average person into like such a weird science fiction series that's taking such a huge swing. So here's what's really smart about doing Caves of Steel, because Caves of Steel are robot detective mysteries, all right? And they follow the robot hating detective Elijah Bailey, who has to solve a series of murders with his robot partner, R, that stands for robot, R. Daniel Oliva. Now, each season takes a different look at a different mystery on a different world, and these were the most commercial of Asimov's book. Now, of his books. Now, Caves of Steel was adapted into an episode of Story Parade starring Peter Cushing in 1964, so it's been done once, but come on, it really hasn't been done. But here's why I think doing Caves of Steel and the second book is Naked Sun, which, by the way, is basically about social distancing and lockdown. But Caves of Steel is a real environmental story. And then now Robots of Dawn, which is the third book in this series, was a massive hit. 3 months on the best New York Times bestseller list in the 80s. It's a very beloved novel. So, but here's why I think it's so smart to tie this into the Foundation series, is because this is a much more commercial project. It's very easy to get into. It's a murder mystery. It's science fiction. It's much more mainstream and commercially viable. But if you make it and you connect it to the Foundation series, then it gives people more of a reason for completionists to get into Foundation. And there's ways that you can do that by connecting the stories in little subtle ways, by just like having the universe connect together. And really, the completionists will just jump into Foundation because they're like, hey, it's in the same series. So you could do it concurrently while you continue to make Foundation, and I'd give it to a lot of the same team that were doing Foundation. I think Goyer and Friedman are doing a great job, but this would be a much easier production because it's like less of a weird story. But if they kind of like connected and oversaw it, but like got a new crew, but then again, I would hand the directing duties for the pilot to Roxanne Dawson, who most people know as playing B'Elanna Torres on Star Trek Voyager. But if you've been paying attention to what she's been directing, she's directed a lot of TV recently and a few films, and she's a great underrated director. And I think her episodes of Foundation are really, really, really good. I'm not sure why she isn't directing Star Trek. She has the experience, but whatever. Anyways, I would give Roxanne Dawson the keys to doing the pilot for a Caves of Steel robot murder mysteries series. And really, I would give Dawson, I would hire her to direct almost any of these that we talked about. The Jarrell of Jory would be great with her. Seriously, she could do pretty much, I mean, everything except for Canticle for Leibowitz, which I'd give her one of the parts, but I want three directors. But Roxanne Dawson, you're awesome. It's great. I'd hire you for this. Kapla. And let's see an expanded Asimov universe. Okay, so let's wrap this up. let's do a couple honorable mentions now. I didn't mention Arthur C. Clarke because he's had plenty of movies, and frankly, it's a novel that he wrote in the 80s that I'd most like to see of a movie is Songs of a Distant Earth, which is my favorite Arthur C. Clarke book. Now, again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but if you're wondering why Robert Sheckley or Philip K. Dick or John Bruner or any of these folks aren't here, it's because I think of them as new wave writers, and we're going to do a whole nother video on new wave writers. I don't know, maybe next week. But the thing is, I know this video will live out there forever. So, you know, this is just my personal list. This is what I would do. So there's no right or wrong. I know you're gonna go to the comments and you're gonna tell me what I missed, and that's fine. But while you're there, kind of like and subscribe to the channel, to the page, and follow my content because I cover modern science fiction and horror as well on this blog, and there's lots of interviews with new authors, and there's stuff that you can find there. But don't forget to subscribe to Dickheads, the Dickheads podcast on the Dickheads YouTube page as well, or on the podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts as PKD Heads for reasons that you'd have to ask Apple. But anyways, but if you want more sci-fi history and that kind of thing, like we talk about it all there. But if you want to support my work, I don't have a Patreon, but what you can do is go and buy one of my books because that means a lot to me. And there's links in the show notes for all the books. Now, I have 2 books coming out soon, and probably I know most people watching this video are going to be after those books are out. So I'm going to mention them here, but as of recording, these books are not out. Nightmare City, that was written with my Dickheads co-host, Anthony Trevino. And Nightmare City, we were kind of going for The Wire if Clive Barker and Philip K. Dick were on the writing staff. It's kind of the vibe we were going for. It's a horror, sci-fi, crime thing about systematic racism and climate change and all kinds of stuff. And so that's Nightmare City, out from Grand Mall Press in late 2022. In 2023, I have a horror novel from Clash Books coming out called that takes place on the last day of World War II, called The Last Night to Kill Nazis. Check that one out. And my next video will be on classic horror fiction that I would like to see as movies. I'm going to do that one, and then I'm going to come back to the new wave. But like and subscribe and follow, and please help me share these videos. So if you like my takes, share the videos, and we'll see you again in the future. Thanks for liking and subscribing, and follow the Dickheads podcast too. All right, thanks.